Collection of talks on Nokodemion's teaching from Contact Reports 400s.
Contact Report 459.
You have hit the nail on the head with that one, because I have already been asked about that, and I have given the following explanation. In the old days, there were very few literate people, because the people in general were not educated, and therefore, as illiterate, they were not able to read and write. So in this respect, it did not make sense to produce writings on a large scale. And those among the few scribes to whom the prophets assigned the task of writing down the teaching of truth, the teaching of the Spirit, the teaching of life, or the goblet of the truth, according to Nokodemion's instructions, falsified everything beyond recognition. In the old days, there were not yet any schools like today in which humans could learn to read and write in general, just as there were not any technical possibilities to copy handwritten notes. If something was already duplicated, then everything had to be copied by hand with great effort. But this was only possible if handwritten records were made. Hieroglyphics, cuneiform writing, etc. had to be laboriously copied, and even the scribes of these forms of writing were extremely few and far between, and were practically not to be found among the common people, but only among scholars. This is a fact that is consistently concealed in modern times, and gives the impression that many people were already familiar with writing and reading in ancient times, which is of course not true. Only in the modern age, which began in 1844, did reading and writing become widespread among the humans on a large scale, and the technique of duplication and mass production of books, writings, journals, and newspapers, etc., was developed on a large scale. And it was not until the end of the 20th century that the electronic distribution of books and writings through computers and in the form of the internet developed in such a way that everything could be easily distributed around the world. All this was already foreseen by Nokodemion and the Arahat Athersata level, which is why the whole thing was prepared and aligned in such a way that the goblet of the truth, in modern times, and thus Nokodemion's teaching of truth, teaching of the Spirit, teaching of life, should be brought in its final form and in its entirety, and distributed worldwide. But this is to happen in modern times, because only at this time all technical and electronic conditions are given, which make the whole thing possible. And so it was also planned for this time that no longer only parts, but the whole teaching was to be brought and no longer to be recorded by commissioned scribes, who from time immemorial have always falsified everything beyond recognition, but that the last announcer of the Nokodemion lineage would record in his own hand the goblet of the truth, and the further parts of the teaching of truth, the teaching of the Spirit, the teaching of life, and with the help of his faithful ones would process them and spread them worldwide.
Contact Report 468 question.
In the OM, and in an excerpt from the OM in the booklet 49 questions, it is written that only the creation is worthy of worship vererungswürdig, and adoration anbetungswürdig. But in contrast to this, it states in Figu in a nutshell, point 4, that the creation should not be worshipped or venerated. A person tried to explain to me that this results in a contradiction. Sean Scott, USA.
Answer: this does not deal with a contradiction, but rather an obvious lack of understanding of the facts of the true meaning of the words by a person who has not worked with the spiritual teaching Geisteslehre and its old style of writing. Consequently, this person is not familiar with this field and judges only according to popular and religious meanings without understanding the fundamental meaning of the terms. The old meaning of the German words as used in the OM, as for example, Verehrung and Anbetung, are not the same as what is found today in the common incorrect assessment and interpretation of terms. The content of the OM does not date back several millenniums, but rather millions of years, and consequently various terms had at that time a completely different meaning as what those same terms have today. Old terms, that are newly presented in the spiritual teaching and have a meaning and interpretation that is more accurate than what is generally the case with the common meaning in the present-day language. Show precisely for the first time what meaning is to be truly understood by them. What becomes evident, especially in regards to the German language, is that it is not possible for it to be translated exactly and completely into another language to the extent that the exact meaning is conveyed. Truthfully, a translation capturing the general meaning from German into another language can occur only partially and through rephrasing, however, never in a complete and precise manner. The reason for this is the great many words and terms in the German language which specifically describe and convey very accurately definite values which are not found in other languages due to their poor vocabulary, whereby these languages are to be referred to as meager languages in comparison to the German language. From this alone, that the German language has for many things very clear, appropriate and precise terms, which are lacking in all the other known earthly languages. Misunderstandings arise, which is also one of the most important reasons why, in regards to the translation of every figu, writing that deals with spiritual teaching themes, or with every book with spiritual teaching content, the original German text must be given along with the translation. And because the necessary extensive understanding of the spiritual teaching text can only be realized when someone has a good command of the German language, every human being who is interested in the teaching of truth, teaching of spirit, teaching of life, is urged to learn the German language comprehensively. In the old languages, as given in the OM, the various terms have often completely different meanings, as with those meanings in the recently given spiritual teaching and in the present-day general usage. Since time immemorial, languages have continuously changed and improved, as well as the meanings and their interpretations, which is particularly the case in regards to the words, terms, and interpretations found in the spiritual teaching, and above all regarding the great many terms given in the OM. So, in the present-day usage of the German language, the word Währung has, in meaning and interpretation, the following negative qualities: idolization, homage, preference given to someone or something, prostration, unquestioning faith, devoutness, ecstasy, rapture, glorification, making someone something, a tin god, apotheosis, adoration, fanaticism, and in regards to Anbetung worship, the present-day meaning and interpretation have the following negative qualities: supplication, the act of pleading, imploring to someone, begging, craving, demanding, incantation, invocation, magic, rituals, the desire for something, someone, humbleness, submissiveness, the surrendering of one's self, personality, self-abasement request. Long ago, the term Währung, as it is used in the OM, had a completely different meaning, namely in the sense of honor, acknowledgement, recognition, honoring, praising, great respect, high esteem, high regard, to show dignity, and concerning the term Anbetung, as mentioned in the OM, its meaning in the old days was approval, appraisal, appreciation, to show esteem, appreciation. The old terms, words, and their interpretations in regards to Währung and Anbetung, as they are presented in the OM, represent a very high value in regards to the significance, greatness and respect for the creation. Contrary to these high values are the negative qualities of the present day, namely viewed according to the understanding of the language, the values of the words, as well as their interpretation by the teaching of truth, the teaching of spirit, the teaching of life, presented anew and for the last time. Billy translation, Willem Mondrian, Switzerland.
Contact Report 469.
With your explanation, I can understand the whole thing. It is actually quite simple if you know what to do. But see here, this is the additional word I want to add to the goblet of the truth.
What the truth may tell us.
Respect for nature as a whole and for creation and its laws and commandments must determine the thoughts and feelings of human beings and their actions. Human beings must be in harmony with creation, with nature, with the earth, and with the universe, and with all the varieties of existence that arise from them. Rivers, stones, plants, animals, lakes, seas, brooks, springs, the air and water, trees and bushes, and everything that creeps and flees are also desirable life forms, and many of them are also connected with psychic vibrations. And all of them are intercommunicating beings, all of them knowing about their common existence. Consciousness and psyche of all creatures, in turn, are on a journey through time and through the countless manifestations of life, encompassing many physical existences. And in this process, death is a lead to a new birth, as well as a transformation into the world of the hereafter and the purely spiritual. This is the basis of the close and indissoluble intertwining of all life. And in this way, no life form seeks to rise above and rise above others within its association. For in every life form, there's good and not evil from the bottom up. For evil is learned and practiced through injustice and degeneration. In principle, through the creative laws and commandments, all life forms are subject to the coexistence in which each individual must understand himself as a valuable building block of the whole in all existence of creation. And this also applies to every political and religious, ideological and philosophical direction, as well as to the earth created by the creative plan and to the entire universe. Whether simple or fanatical religions and sects, whether stubborn nationalism, fascism, power-hungry politics, terrorism or neo-capitalism, etc., all these directions are aberrations of the negative and evil, and especially in the third millennium, represent an immense threat to all the peoples of the earth. And indeed, the danger of a human catastrophe has never been as great as it is today and in the future. Cynical materialism and unbridled neo-capitalism, which have already spread to the whole world, are already causing extremely serious damage to the nature and morals of the people of the earth. And this damage continues to increase in proportion to the irresponsibly increasing overpopulation. It has already reached the point where a collision of the industrial nations can take place, which can hardly be stopped anymore, whereby then also the states of the third world fall into the same darkness. And if this happens, then a third world fire is imminent, whatever it may look like. Earth humans, however, are actually on the best way to this, so it's only a question of time and reason when and if it will actually happen. But once again, it is time for the signs to point out that the whole thing will be inevitable. But this third world fire can have different forms, so also a collapse of nature, of the atmosphere, of the waters and of the planet as well as of the animal world, which is maltreated and disregarded by the human beings of the earth, so simply a global catastrophe. And this collapse then has the consequence that a collapse of civilization takes place, whereby ultimately either the complete extermination of Earth humans, or at least a relapse into the hardest primitiveness would be the result. A relapse into the completed primitive anarchy is also possible, through which only a painful vegetating away would be possible for all still existing life forms. Seen from this threatening perspective, The whole thing means no more and no less than that Earth humans will lose all their valuable achievements through a global catastrophe, and this only because a millennium of misguided development has taken place with regard to true love, freedom, harmony, and real peace among all life forms. And indeed, today such an apocalypse is looming in the sky of fate for Earth humans, because long ago the flourishing culture of truth was destroyed throughout the world and replaced by evil, violence, and all forms of degeneration, especially through the machinations of politics, false legislation, false punishments, religions, and sects. In the Christian world, the Roman Catholic Church is undoubtedly and primarily to blame for this. Christianity, as a monotheistic and strictly autocratic religion, is to blame for the fact that after the fall of the despotic Roman Empire, completely new, evil, and degenerate schools of thought and forms of government developed, which spread all over the earth, and from which all people suffer today in modern times. The Roman Catholic Church, in particular, inherited the practices of the inhuman Roman Empire and, instead of the former Roman military tyranny, set up a malignant mind-based tyranny, which found its accumulation in the Inquisition, but has been unbroken, albeit to a lesser extent, ever since. Christianity in general, as well as its numerous sects, dictates in monotheism a tremendous narrow-mindedness that hatefully excludes every dissenter and dissenting believer. In the whole of Christianity and its sects, as in all other religions and their sects, there is an absolute bondage to the religious and sectarian heresies, and consequently a conscious freedom is not tolerated, but condemned and treated as sacrilege and heresy. Freedom of thought that is based on creation and nature, without anchoring and worshipping a religious divinity in it, is not allowed. And consequently, human beings who are addicted to a religious faith are not allowed to find the way to the effective truth of the creative, and thus to the laws and commandments given to creation, and cannot obey them. Through fear and terror and the threat of divine punishment, believing followers of religion and sects are forbidden the path to the real truth of creation, and thus also the path to the teaching of truth, teaching of the Spirit, teaching of life, and are made into an act of crime against God and faith. The pernicious effects of Christianity and all other religions have been experienced by the people of Earth for thousands of years, but in their religious and sectarian narrow-mindedness, they do not want to see the terrible truth, and do not want to accept that religious and sectarian faith leads ever further away from the effective truth. And with the constant drifting away from the effective truth of the creative, and thus also from creation itself, from Earth, nature and the universe, and from true life, love, peace, freedom and harmony, more and more human beings are being brought into the world. Overpopulation is being further bred, and ever greater destruction is being wrought. Truly, the once flourishing life of human beings on Earth, when there were not yet any religions, sects, false ideologies and philosophies, as well as no politics and imperial machinations of power-hungry people, and also no degenerated materialism, everything was still largely in order. However, religions, sects, lust for power, materialism and imperialist affectations destroyed every identity that sought to balance the situation. And as a result, the once friendly and allied human beings of the earth were torn apart by endless power struggles and religious wars, as well as by terror. Feuds, hatred, jealousy, revenge, retribution, and murder and manslaughter. One of the important reasons why religions and sects are wrong and erroneous in their teachings is the undeniable fact that they all fundamentally misunderstand the true nature of creation and its laws and commandments, and therefore also the nature of life and death. What religions and sects teach their believers are errors and confusions of the most evil form, and they plunge human beings into terrible irrational fears, fear and torment in the most inhumane way. But this is an unforgivable crime, in addition to the fact that practically all religions and sects can be accused of countless other terrible crimes of the most varied forms. These include, for example, the persecution and cruel murder of dissidents and dissenters, the forms of torture and criminal courts, of religious or sectarian raids, wars, the drift towards murder, mass suicide and material exploitation, as well as fanatical, religious and sectarian terrorism, etc. Thus, in the course of the history of the existence of religions, sects, ideologies and philosophies, criminal acts of the greatest magnitude and of extreme malice and degeneration have been committed in their name and faith, which have cost the lives of millions of human beings. Truthfully, none of the two-faced religions, sects, philosophies and ideologies are humanitarian, even if their representatives and believers claim and lie about the contrary. They all speak with forked tongues and also act accordingly. In truth, they do not know a humane world, for humanity is unbearable to them, and so they do not tolerate. And if they do, then only for appearance's sake, that those of different faith and those who think differently walk beside them. Although they all refer to the ideal of charity outwardly, they trample on the true teaching of charity as it is given in the teaching of truth, teaching of the Spirit, teaching of life, and by the creative laws. This cynical and incendiary character of all religions, sects and certain philosophies and ideologies connected with them, excluding the really good, humane ideologies and philosophies, which undoubtedly also exist, has led from time immemorial to intolerance and unrestraint towards all things of existence, as well as to contempt for life, for human beings, their rights, values, and needs with regard to the evolution of consciousness and the ability to fulfill the creative laws and commandments. The goblet of the truth, which corresponds to the teaching of the truth, teaching of the Spirit, teaching of life, makes clear what the true face of creation with its laws and commandments is, from which true love, peace, freedom and harmony result. And in the teaching of the prophets, from which the goblet of the truth results, there are references to the creative laws and commandments, which appear in various manifestations and show that false religions, sects, philosophies and ideologies correspond to the most evil that can ever be conceived. But this evilness has been and is being practiced in the present since ancient times, and determines the power of religions, sects, ideologies, philosophies and politics, whereby they, as they have done since ancient times, exert enormous coercion on human beings in order to dominate them. All of them force human beings under their thumb so that they blindly believe and obey the exercise of political, social, religious, sectarian, ideological and philosophical pressure. But this is ultimately the downfall of man, together with the overpopulation that has been cultivated, because the human beings of the earth are nowadays only capable of using and living in absolute freedom in their consciousness, in the great masses their truthful knowledge of the teaching of truth, teaching of the Spirit, teaching of life, and also of the creative laws and commandments. Thus, in order to avoid the downfall of humanity in the new millennium, in the third millennium, the way back to the creative truth and to the creative laws and commandments must be found, followed, and thus everything must be newly designed with regard to the learning and knowledge of the effective plan of creation. But this can only happen when Earth humans find the roots of the creative truth, and with it the creative laws and commandments again, and obey them. The modern age, the new age of Aquarius, offers the possibility of a turning point through the goblet of the truth, through the teaching of the truth, the teaching of the Spirit, the teaching of life. But this teaching, which has been kept ready from time immemorial by the true prophets, is by no means exhausted. For outside the known teaching it continues infinitely and never exhausts itself for human beings. Everything is developed in the human beings of the earth into pure power thinking, intolerance and contempt for women, as well as hostility towards nature, denial of the truth of the creative laws and commandments, and also the rampant overpopulation, by which the climate and nature of the earth are destroyed. Furthermore, the power thinking of the rulers and the evil violence of religious belief of every kind have also resulted in an almost unmistakable suppression of freedom of consciousness. This manifests a profound disregard for the natural and also the creative laws and commandments, as well as for life and all existence. As a result of this, earthly humanity, if we look at the present situation, has been driven to the brink of a global catastrophe, and is now in the best of times in the process of finally maneuvering itself into it, if the overpopulation is not finally stopped and reduced to a reasonable population level through birth control. The effective truth stands for the giver of life and for life itself as it's given in the bosom of creative laws and commandments. The life-affirming creative energy connects human beings directly with the laws and commandments of the comprehensive creation, and its power fills the whole earth and the universe. And it is the same energy that wants to be in harmony with all life, with human beings, the planet and the universe. In this form, the life-affirming creative energy is an extremely important criterion for the essence of the effective creative truth and life itself. Untruth, however, the lie, is powerless and hostile to the creative, and has nothing to do with the womb of truth. So lie and untruth lead only an illusory life. Those human beings, however, who are attached to this illusory life, have removed themselves from the truth and from the security of the creative laws and commandments, as well as from Mother Earth and from the goodness of the universe. They are estranged from the truth, the earth and the creative, and are therefore beings of anti-truth. But with it also adversaries against the creatively warm and protective, because they can only assert themselves through evil, through violence, through lies and deception, as well as through the exercise of power and all degenerate things. All the catastrophes of all kinds, caused by mankind on earth, and ultimately also by the enormous and irresponsibly cultivated overpopulation, plunged the world and the whole earthly population into the abyss, in a way from which it is very difficult for them to work their way out again. And all the catastrophes that have occurred worldwide and that have been triggered and brought about by humanity on earth have only happened because the principle of truth, and thus also the creative laws and commandments, have been violated instead of following the truly wise path of effective truth and the teaching of the true prophets, which has been handed down from primeval times as the spiritual teaching, or rather as the teaching of truth, teaching of the spirit, teaching of life. And therefore this truth is also given in the book Goblet of the Truth, of which a first part, namely the teaching of Enoch, was also called Cauldron of Life by the Druid Prince Merlin, alias Merlin, and has nothing to do with the alleged Grail of Christianity, which is based only on lies and deceit, never existed, and in which therefore also the blood of Emmanuel Jesus was not caught by Joseph of Arimathea at his crucifixion. The real Grail existed only as a holy place, and in the Cauldron of Life was locked up the document, a document of the teaching of the true prophet Enoch from the 7th row of the Nokodemion. The document was given as a copy of the Pleiaren in Keriquena, the triple goddess, to the druid Merlin the Laughing One, later commonly called Merlin. Merlin poured the copy into the chalice that became known as the Cauldron of Life, and Christian adulteration was used to make the Grail, but this is not in any way connected to it, because the Grail was a place with a spring, surrounded by trees and plants, where the Druids used to do their meditations. And this Christian Grail adulteration has been handed down from its origin to the present day, but again in another monstrous adulteration which claims that it is the cup, or Grail, of Emmanuel Jesus, from which Emmanuel and his disciples drank at Holy Communion, and in which Emmanuel's blood was collected at the crucifixion by Joseph of Arimathea. This monstrous lie and falsification of the truth also applies to the so-called Holy Lance, with which Emmanuel Jesus was stabbed in the loins by a Roman mercenary on the cross to ascertain his death. and since this lance has been holy ever since, and since it also contains immense power, which is supposed to make rulers out of the greedy for power, it is highly honored. In truth, however, this lance never touched Emmanuel's loin, for it is a Christian forgery that was not discovered until the 8th century AD. It is also the so-called Turin shroud, which is supposed to show Emmanuel's Jesus-bound image, but is in fact the death image of an Italian merchant named Caesar Canova, and was made by his brother Luciano Canova, who studied alchemy. Merlin, that is to say, Merlin tried to teach the teachings of Enoch through his influence with King Arthur, that is to say, Arthur, who was his protege and pupil, and with the pagan knights of the Round Table, but failed miserably because the fierce clan leader Arthur and his pagan knights could not get along with the teaching. So Arthur took possession of the sealed cauldron of life and sank it into the sea by himself. Christianity has falsified the actual image of the Grail, or the image of the holy Celtic meditation place of the Druids beyond recognition. And the banal reason for this was the cowardly fear of Christian priests and believers, because they were afraid of the teachings of Celtic philosophy of faith. Over 2 millennia, the whole thing plunged millions upon millions of believers into a boundless disorientation of knowledge and truth, resulting not only in many wars, degenerations and evil of all kinds, but also in the destruction of millions of human lives, many of them through the delusions, lies and falsifications of Christianity and all other religions and sects. But from all this together also resulted a tremendously deep-rooted fear of life, which was increased by the terrible obsessions or fear-related obsessions with death, which were brought about by Christianity and the other religions. The craziest of all religions is Christianity, which claims in its madness the one-time physical rebirth of its alleged Son of God, Jesus. In early Christianity, it was even claimed that this would happen very soon after Jesus' death. And this was also true of those who believed in him. For this reason, in ancient times, thousands upon thousands of decaying corpses were properly hoarded in the living rooms of houses, which logically led to catastrophic epidemics, as is especially known from ancient Rome. Later on, Christian theologians proclaimed the return of Christ and the resurrection of the dead at the Last Judgment to be the end of time, and thus postponed the fulfillment of all deception and nonsense to the never day, or to a never when. But this in turn led to the fact that instead of the hoarding of corpses, other crazy and pathological aberrations appeared, as for instance the feeble-minded and far-reaching cult of relics, which still today floods the whole of Christianity, as also other religions and sects. The believers are not only literally inundated with allegedly genuine but truly false utensils from human beings raised to be founders of religion, but also with alleged body parts of obscure saints and martyrs. But there are also channelers doing their mischief, who allegedly talk to Christ, God, Jesus' mother Mary, Jesus' father Joseph, Padre Pio, or any other deceased saints, etc., as their chosen ones, and who want to be in contact with them to receive messages. And the fact that so-called sanctified ones or castates appear at the same time, and make the faithful even more nonsensical, by causing stigmatization or the 5 wounds of Christ on their bodies through their broken psyche or through clear self-mutilation, further encourages all this nonsense. But this is also the case with regard to the alleged exorcism by Catholic priests and other devil and demon believers, by which human beings with very serious psychological damage and psychophysical states of excitement are often tortured to death. Christianity also intervened in the life after death, as a result of which the faithful since the existence of the Catholic Church have fallen into terrible obsessions. The rebirth of the spirit form is strictly denied, and the hereafter is presented as a kind of limbo, called purgatory, and as actual hell. Contrary to this, heaven was invented in which a god supposedly has his residence and welcomes into his kingdom all those who piously dance to his violin. And with reference to this psychotic fantasy, the Christian religion, as well as sects and certain other religions, claims that heaven is virtually the terminus for human life. But anyone who fundamentally sins against the Christian faith and everything connected with it will inevitably end up in hell for eternity, and will have to suffer endless and terrible torture there. But all people who die, except the saints, cannot go straight to heaven in the process. For everyone must first be purified by purgatory, and this over a period of millions of years in order to become purified and worthy of heaven in the form of alleviated tortures in hell, and thus to attain heavenly purity. If we take a look at all this Christian religious nonsense, we can see that the whole thing is an extraordinarily underdeveloped attitude of consciousness that could only develop from a sick human brain. And every human being who study the relevant religious writings of Christianity and the other religions and sects of the same or similar orientation must recognize, if they are capable of clear thinking and reason, that the authors and advocates of all these absurdities are and were psychopaths throughout, who transferred their own irrational fears and delusions to their pathologically stupid and primitive, false, idiotic and incomprehensible heresies. Seen in this way as a whole, the religious and sectarian teachings of life, and of the last things of all existence, are not just one great error, but an all-encompassing, misleading and malicious lie, through which innumerable human beings go astray, far from the truth to rot in ignorance of untruth. This is because, through the false teachings of religions and sects, philosophies and ideologies, they are given a completely false and frightening idea of life, and of the effective truth, and of the real creative laws and commandments. And so all religions and sects, all philosophies and ideologies, and all human beings who adhere to them, have simply not grasped the true meaning of truth. All you human beings of good reason and good will are called upon to face the fundamental conflict between good and evil, and the degenerate, and to take the side of the positive, the progressive, and thus of good and life. And all of you, human beings of the earth, who have the courage to fight against evil, the negative and the degenerate, must offer help through your sharp reason and your intellect, through love, peace, freedom, and harmony, and use only these as weapons. Only through these weapons you can fight against all the rampant contempt for humanity and the destructive rage of all those human beings on earth who are addicted to evil, violence, materialism, capitalism, and the degenerate and inhuman. Put up your resistance against all degenerations that threaten life and all existence, and put up your resistance against all evil today, in the present and in all future, because only through this you are able to bring about a healthy change in every respect. Never bow to evil, but do everything in goodness, righteousness, justice, and according to the creative laws and commandments and their truth, so that you may bring about the final defeat of the negative and evil principle. Do it always in reverence and dignity for life, even when you suffer terrible setbacks. Hold fast to your knowledge of the effective truth of the validity of the creative laws and commandments that teach love, peace, freedom, and harmony, that you may live with them. Fight for this truth just like all the true prophets of all times and like all those people who have done this for truth and life for thousands of years and who are doing it today, tomorrow and in the future, even if the successes were or are only small. But constant dripping wears the stone. This is the motto for it since time immemorial. Humanity and democratic social orders have been achieved and implemented over time by peaceful people, fighting according to reason and truth, as well as many human rights and other values. These are visible and tangible results of those human beings who have fought and continue to fight for them for thousands of years. And if, on the other hand, earthly humanity today stands as if mockingly close to the abyss of the destruction of all things, then it is precisely in this present epoch that the chance of a change and the victory of the struggle opens up, which, however, requires that the people of the earth finally decide for the good, positive, for the value of life, and for life itself. The truth is that with the third millennium, a new chance is rising in the sky of destiny, which can make the darkness of the past warlike millennia disappear and immerse the future in glittering brightness. All that is necessary is to grasp the chance at its roots, to respect the teaching of the prophets, to live according to the goblet of the truth, which the Celtic Druids already called the goblet of life and cauldron of life. You, human beings of Earth, find the way to a positive, life-affirming consciousness so that you can finally truly live your life and begin to shape your future in love, peace, wisdom, freedom and harmony. Because despite the threat of evil, you have the opportunity and chance to do so. The universe itself, in its interplay with your Earth, gives you the impetus for reorientation, and through this you can find a loving balance in the human realm, which also leads you to equality and equal rights in the mutual complementarity of man and woman. And if you make use of the opportunity given to you in all things, then in the new age of the Aquarian era and in the third millennium, after a very long time of missing, you will again attain the whole fullness of life. You have been striving for thousands of years for a development of harmony, for love, peace, freedom, and for a harmonious togetherness. And all this is ideally suited to create order in all things on Earth. And if you follow this urge given by the laws of creation, then you step out of the darkness of the degenerate into a much brighter era. Remember, however, that this will only happen if you are prepared to accept the great gift that your Earth, the whole universe, and the creative laws and commandments offer you. You yourselves are witnessing your bright future, but all of you human beings of the Earth, you must do your part and fight for everything with your own means of love, peace, harmony, and freedom to break out of the darkness. But you can only do this when the recognition awakens in you of everything that the creative laws and commandments offer you. And when you learn and obey them, as it's taught to you through the goblet of the truth, and the teaching of the truth, teaching of the Spirit, teaching of life, as it has been given to you since time immemorial by the true prophets. If you human beings of the earth seek the creative laws and commandments, which form the creative harmony and goodness, with your intellect and reason and with your intuition, you will find them everywhere. Recognize and understand them at every turn, be it in the gushing of a spring, in the face of a human being, in a flower, in the murmur of the forest or sea, in the gleam of the sun, in the flashing of the stars, in the eyes of a creature, or in all other things that exist everywhere. And if you are human beings of the earth, make yourself capable again of connecting this new and yet ancient truth in all forms with all real forms of life. Then you will be able to walk a holistic path in the consciousness of truth. Look in this sense and with great courage into the future, in spite of the terrible setbacks in the past, the present, and the future still to come. Follow the instruction for your change for the good and positive. Then you can take the chance for a new beginning and connect it with the demands of life. And through this you will solve many of today's humanity problems once and for all in a peaceful, harmonious and constructive way. Heal yourselves and your world. Then you will find salvation in the form of the rebirth of your healthy and rational consciousness. Heal yourselves, you human beings of the earth, women and men, for then the message of love, freedom and harmony, peace and harmonious togetherness will no longer remain, just a great and promising dream, but will become truth and reality. For then it will be realized for you that you will bring forth new and good deeds, thoughts and feelings, as well as infinitely rich life experiences, whereby your life will unfold for true happiness. Remember that the weaker all the evil, negative and degenerate in you becomes, the more profoundly the fatal aberrations in your thoughts and feelings as well as in your actions and behavior will be corrected and dissolved, which have determined your life and your evil destinies until now. Of course, it is still the case that many of you human beings on Earth who want to follow the truth of the creative laws and commandments still have to overcome many and strong resistances. But consider that all true prophets also faced such challenges and had to overcome them, and as they were able to do so, so it is also possible for you, if you are only willing to do it.
Sim Yase, Silver Star Center, 10th August 2008, 0117 Hars Billy.
This is very well written, and as I thought, it is indeed worthwhile that you also integrate these words into the goblet of the truth at the beginning of the book, along with the other things, as we have already discussed. And what I once have to say in regard to your detailed and clear language and to all that you teach and write, concerning the doctrine in connection with your mission, should be a clear and unshakable proof to all ignorant and counter-creating Earth humans that you are really and truly the herald of the modern age. By this, however, I do not mean just a simple prophet for a certain people, such as those who from time to time appear again and again with different peoples, proclaiming half-truths or even actual heresies. You are not only a prophet who knows how to interpret the events of the future, but you are also a real proclaimer in the value of proclaiming and teaching the infallible laws and commandments given by creation, which was not ever the property of any of the simple prophets, but only of the prophet-caller personalities from the spirit form line of the Nokodemion. Therefore, your duty and mission is not the same as that of a prophet, who in his actions is only devoted to one people and its religion, because you are of a different kind, because your mission is a prophethood, but also a proclamation, not of a popular but of a global kind. So you are a world prophet, and at the same time also a world scout and a bansroot like Nokodemion, because you bring the teaching of truth, teaching of the spirit, teaching of life, and thus the creative natural laws and commandments for the whole of earthly mankind, and this in addition to the fact that through your efforts also foreign humanities on other worlds learn and profit from it. But now to something else. Before you can say something against my words again, you have also asked Florina to clarify certain things concerning King Arthur and the druid Prince Merlin. In my father Svath records, which he kept about my grandfather Ezekiel the Mediator, note Billy, I found something that might interest you, and it is this. King Arthur, or Artus, king of the Celts, contrary to today's depiction of having been a hero or the like, was absolutely not a courtly king in shining armor, nor a good-hearted and noble hero. King Artus was a fierce 6th century clan leader, a war king, who led his pagan warriors in bloody battles and raids. He was a slaughterer and kept the name the Boar of Cornwall. His knights truly were bloodthirsty, murderous thugs, as you say. Artus himself was Merlin's protege, a pupil of Merlin the Druid for 7 years. Arthur, born 4.1, 469, died 11.8. 509 at the Battle of the Camlan Crooked Valley, in a duel with his nephew, the cunning Prince Medraut, was a brutal and stubborn person, for whom a human life meant very little or nothing. Arthur's wife was Gwynwefara, Guanamara, or Guinevere. White spirit, shining spirit, note Billy. His father was Uther Tudor, carrying the surname Pendragon, who was already married and impregnated another woman in a most insidious manner, and thus procreated Arthur. Arthur's mother was Igerna, who was also married and was the wife of Prince Gorlois. Actually, the liberal Celtic marriage laws did not overvalue lifelong physical fidelity. Thus, while Gorlois, the Cornic duke, was deceived and cheated by the fraud, King Uther and Queen Igerna could engage in a sexual act. The story goes like this. Arthur's father, Uther Tudor Pendragon, fell in love with Queen Igerna of Cornwall, the young and beautiful wife of Gorlois, Duke, and Prince of Cornwall. Igerna, however, was faithful to her husband, so Uther Pendragon sought the support of Merlin and devised an intrigue to abduct the Queen of Cornwall and seduce her. Merlin lured Gorlois away from his castle on a pretext in order for Uther Pendragon to secretly snatch Igerna at night and bring her to Tintagel. A confidant of Merlin, who was also a servant to the Queen Igerna of Cornwall, then administered a drug to her, and she reached a hallucinogenic and will-less state. Igerna was kidnapped from the castle and taken to a certain place where Uther Tudor Pendragon and several male and female druids were already assembled under Merlin's leadership. Inside the circle they formed, Uther and the drugged will-less, Igerna performed the procreation. From their union, Arthur Ardus Arthus was born on the 4th of January, 469. Uther Tudor did not leave that matter to rest for long. The very same night he let Igerna's prince consort Gorlois be killed by his own bloodthirsty knights. The plan he devised with Merlin thus ended with complete success, Igerna's husband now out of the way. When Gorlois' dead body was returned to Tintagel, Igerna was already back home, but was now made pregnant by Uther Tudor, and was still highly intoxicated by the drug and did not realize what had really happened, since she only later learned everything. The sword Kaladvolk, spoken Kaladfloch in German, sparkling sword, because it was emitting sparkling or lightning-like blazes, radiance. Later Clyburn and falsified to Excalibur in ecclesiastical Latin, was a lightweight beam weapon in the form of a sword. It was forged and finished on the island of Avalon under the surveillance and the involvement of the Playa Renin Caridwena, a sister of my grandfather Ezekiel. 1. Caridwena gave it as a gift to Merlin, who later handed it to Arthur, who then fought many bloody battles with it. All of Caridwena's efforts to regain possession of the sword failed because it had been abused. Hence she was very angry with Merlin, but could not persuade him to demand Arthur's sword back and return it to her. It was only after Arthur's death that the sword was reclaimed by Merlin and returned to the Pleiorenin Caridwena, after which she left Earth. She had already angrily ceased contact with Merlin at the time when Arthur committed his first murderous deeds with the sword. At Dinas Bran, Castle of Bran Merlin personally stayed. Dinas Bran Valley was located in the Cymru region where Merlin, the one with great knowledge, was also working. Merlin's real name was Myrddin the Laughing One. Merlin, the Druid of Camelot, received his initiation when he was just 9 years old. However, he was not a sorcerer, respectively a magician, as Christianity had attributed to him, but a druid widely taught in various fields of knowledge. He was also a bard, a doctor, a teacher, a prophet, a historian, and ultimately the king and prince of druids of the Demetier tribe from South Wales. He taught in the West, Occident, on Playa Renin Caridwena's The Triple Goddess, Billy's Note, instructions, and had great visionary skills based on his practiced meditations. Merlin's father was King Morvrin, and his mother was a daughter of the king of the Demetier. Merlin's father was also a visionary, and these visionary capabilities led to the evil legend within the Christian world that Merlin was a scion of the devil, a magician, a sorcerer. The naivete and simplicity of the Christian interpretation held that Merlin and his father's paranormal abilities meant that they were satanical, and that father and son were allied with the devil and fathered by him. Merlin was born on the 1st May, 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 1st and he used his skills in military operations and as Arthur's military advisor, contrary to the instruction and wishes of the Plejaran Ceridwenna, however without becoming morally bankrupt. Merlin also fought with his sword against the warlike Christian intruders who stole into the country through murder and arson, killing off or suppressing the population, to spread the Christian faith, conquer the land, and destroy Celtic philosophy and beliefs. After his last fight, when he was 66 years old in year 515 at the lost battle at Arfderydd, Merlin fled and settled down in a remote area in the wilderness of Caledonia in the Cheviot Hills, where he lived as Myrddin Wilt Merlin in the wilderness. He lived there for some time and then returned to his hometown, where an old female druid named Niniane, also known as Nimue, joined him and was a good friend to him. When he felt his death approaching, she finally accompanied Merlin on Innis Anley Bardsey Island, which he had chosen as his death place. He died there in the arms of the old druid on the 14th of June 542 at the age of 93, and he was buried by the wise woman in a rocky cave according to his wishes. The Knights of the Round Table were malignant, bloody knights and not heroes, as they are presented today. Merlin, being a seer, made prophetic and foresighted statements of which his dragon prophecy made at Dinas Emrys fortress of Emrys or Ambrosius, respectively, is very well known, besides those which he made in the wilderness of Caledonia. Merlin was already contacted in the year 466 by the Plejaran Ceridwenna, a sister of my grandfather Ezekiel the Mediator, as I said before. This took place after the High Council decided to convey Enoch's teachings to Merlin, which he was to disseminate in order to contain the barbarism of the Celts, so that they would refrain from barbarity and their bloody battles. Merlin, being a Celtic druid, was chosen because the High Council hoped that with his help, King Arthur, who, according to a foresight, was to be born on 4th January 469, would transform Enoch's teachings of love, peace, harmony, and the freedom and equality for all human beings into reality. The real reason for this undertaking was the Celtic philosophy, which in many ways parallels the teachings of Enoch, whose wise, effective, and widespread approach should be implemented to make the Celts give up their degenerated behavior of barbaric killings and fighting battles. Merlin received a copy of Enoch's teachings. Being the first part of the Goblet of Truth written on earth, memorized it and then locked and sealed it in a cauldron. This cauldron was no vessel made of gold but of bronze and decorated with a ruby the size of a cherry, and 3 small semi-precious stones, rose quartz, were placed in the shape of a triangle, and in its center the ruby was attached. The 33-centimeter-wide cauldron was meant to collect water from a spring at the Grail. The Grail itself was a sacred place of a spring, usually located on a mountain that the Celts considered a nature sanctuary, and where also a druid's grove was erected that was surrounded by trees and other plants, where the druids meditated in deep consciousness, related interconnection with water, the earth, and plants, as well as with inexhaustibleness of life. These holy places, which have been called the Grail, were intended as places of meditation for the druids, and they existed in many places, wherever druids lived and fulfilled their duties. But at the place with the water source, where also Merlin meditated, a vessel was linked to the well, known as the Cauldron of Abundance, which captured the water located at the divine Ceridwen spring. Merlin, the druid from Camelot, removed the Cauldron of Abundance from its place and replaced it with another vessel, because he put a copy of Enoch's teaching into the cauldron, which he and all druids then called the Cauldron of Life. Merlin presented this cauldron to his protege and pupil Arthur when he was 16 years old in year 485, After Merlin had thoroughly instructed Arthur and his knighthood in Enoch's teaching, and after Arthur had fought his first battle against Germanic invaders led by the chief Aieli. But Arthur and his bloody knights thirsted for blood and vengeance, and they strictly rejected the teachings because they did not want to give up killing and conquest, whereby Arthur thus became very upset and angry at Merlin and cast the gift of the cauldron of life into the sea with his own hands, although he later reconciled with Merlin again. This is the information I can relate to you.
Contact Report 493.
But while we are on the subject of genes, I would like to say something that your father Svath explained to me when I was a teenager, so that it is also recorded in a conversation report. So it is to be said that through the genes, the normal, creative, natural urges have an effect on human beings. Also, the urge to love, according to which human beings have the need for love. But these creative natural urges also convey other values, such as goodness, compassion, peace and harmony, etc., which human beings must, however, work on and bring to bear according to their own will. Unfortunately, it is the case today that human beings often misperceive the urge to love and associate it with material things, such as appearance, reputation, image, profession, money, respectively possessions, property, possessions, skills, and false body odors through chemical hygiene products. The social position and the sexual drive, as well as other things, are also of importance. All these factors often play a very important role today, according to which a so-called love relationship is decided upon. However, this relationship is not based on true sentimental love, but only on a mental emotional love, and therefore also very often on an imaginary delusional love. These factors are also the reasons why human beings are all too often bound together in marriages and other relationships that are doomed to failure from the very beginning, so that sooner or later they will get divorced again and separate. The true urge to love has nothing to do with the sex drive, because this is of a completely different nature, is shaped by instinct, and is not related to a reproductive urge, as is mistakenly assumed. It is probably true that a large percentage of human behavior is determined by genes, but it is not a compulsion that is in the foreground, but only a creative natural urge. But how this urge is used by human beings in terms of their behavior and its effects is a matter of their own choice, which they shape themselves through their ideas, thoughts, and feelings. And with regard to these creative natural urges, which are predetermined in a natural and general way, and in a variety of ways, it must again be said that, with regard to their development, application, and effects, these urges fall exclusively within the sphere of human beings' own decision. This is contrary to all the factors given regularly, which appear as instincts and have nothing to do with the creative natural urges which are given, so that human beings are good and not evil. In principle, every human being is born as a neutral, balanced life form, so that it is not fundamentally good or evil, for good and evil are created only through education and through the influences of the environment. And this is also the case when there are generally unpleasant factors, because only by giving space to these impulses and living them out can they become effective. So if human beings are not impressed by wrong educational measures and wrong environmental influences, and if they avoid evil from the bottom up, then the bad gene storage has not a chance to become effective. This, however, requires that the education in all forms is correct, and corresponds to correctness, accuracy, and righteousness. But these are all facts which I have been teaching for decades, and which I have been spreading worldwide. However, only a few reasonable people recognize the correctness of my words as truth and act accordingly differently and more reasonably. But what brings better success in this respect is related to what I teach, according to the teachings of the prophets respectively, the teachings of truth, teachings of the Spirit, teachings of life, because in this respect there are always pleasant successes. Human beings, men and women of all ages, who are studying the teaching, take the teaching into themselves and try to understand it in the best possible way, whereby their lives as well as their way of life and their relationship with their relatives and fellow men in general change for the better. Also, with regard to the understanding of the creative natural laws and commandments, more and more success is becoming apparent among those human beings who turn to the teaching. The understanding of nature and its fauna and flora as well as of world events is also becoming more and more apparent to the students. And again I experience that the interest in the teaching is constantly increasing and that new successes are also being achieved in the sense that the students are becoming more and more familiar with reality and its truth, and are beginning to live with it. This, while they free themselves from religious or sectarian delusions of God, become free from fear, and begin to think and decide independently, and take responsibility for everything and anything in their lives.